The blind Mafia boss found his light in the woman everyone ignored. I have spent my entire life being looked through, not looked past, not overlooked in the distracted, accidental way people miss things. Looked through, like I was made of glass, like my edges didn't exist, like the space I occupied was simply empty air that happened to be shaped like a woman. I was used to it. I had learned to fold myself small inside it, to find meaning in the margins, the crumbling archives, the forgotten ledgers, the centuries of Calderon's syndicate history that everyone else considered beneath them. I was the archivist, the quiet one, the dead soldier's daughter who had somehow ended up cataloging the Empire's secrets without anyone noticing that I was there. That night, the night of the masquerade, I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the Grand Hall. I had been summoned 2 days earlier by Councilman Fredo, one of the old men who managed the estate's administrative affairs, to retrieve a specific set of financial ledgers from 1987 through 1992. He needed them for the gathering, something about an inheritance dispute that needed historical documentation. I had pulled the files, boxed them, hauled them up from the archive basement myself, because the 2 young men who were supposed to help me had drifted toward the festivities like moths to flame. So there I was, in the alcove off the grand staircase, wearing a pale cream dress I'd bought 3 years ago for my cousin's wedding and never worn again, balancing a heavy box of ledgers against my hip and trying to figure out how to open the door without dropping everything. The masquerade was already loud behind the gilded doors. Music, laughter that had edges, the particular kind of conversation that happens when dangerous men wear beautiful masks and pretend the world is soft. I didn't belong there. I knew that. Everyone knew that. And then the world ended. It didn't feel like chaos at first. It felt like sound going wrong, a crack that didn't belong inside the music, then another, and then the screaming started, and the gilded doors burst open, and suddenly the alcove was full of people running, silk and jewels and terror pouring past me in both directions. I pressed myself flat against the wall, hugging the ledger box like a shield, watching the world come apart at its seams. I smelled the blood before I saw him. Copper, sharp and iron dark. And then he appeared out of the chaos like something conjured. Tall, impossibly broad, moving through the panicked crowd with the terrifying precision of a man who had never once in his life lost control of his body. His tuxedo jacket was torn at the shoulder. His left hand was pressed against his side. His other hand, his other hand, was still wrapped around something I didn't let myself look at directly. The black silk blindfold across his eyes was damp. Dante Calderone. The eclipse. He moved like a predator, tracking by sound alone, his jaw tight, his head tilting slightly with every crash and scream, the way a wolf adjusts to shifting wind. He had taken 3 steps toward me before I understood he didn't know the staircase railing ended 4 feet to his left. The marble steps dropped away there, 8 feet of open air and hard stone below. My body moved before my brain gave permission. "Left," I said. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "The railing ends. 3 steps to your left, and you'll go over the edge. They're coming from the right. 2 of them, coming fast up the service corridor." He stopped. The entire universe seemed to hold its breath. His head turned toward me. Even blind, even through silk and darkness, there was something in that turn that felt like being targeted, like crosshairs I couldn't see settling between my eyes. "Who are you?" His voice was exactly what the stories said it would be. Smoke and gravel and something older than either. It moved through my chest like a frequency. "No one," I said, because that was the truth. That was what I had always been. His large hand, the clean one, found me in the dark. Not my arm, not my shoulder. His palm settled at the base of my throat, fingers spreading slow and deliberate across my racing pulse. And I understood in that single moment that Dante Calderone did not touch things he didn't intend to keep. No one, he repeated softly, like the word tasted wrong. His thumb pressed against the point where my pulse hammered the hardest. You're trembling, but not from fear of me. I wasn't. That was the terrifying part. I was trembling because he was right, because his hand on my throat felt like recognition, like something I had been waiting for in a language I didn't know I spoke. The men are 30 seconds out, I said instead of answering. He made a sound low in his chest, almost approval, almost something else. Then the world exploded back into motion, and Dante Calderone kept his hand at my throat and let me guide him through it. I didn't know then that I had just become the most dangerous woman in Palermo. I only knew that for the first time in my life, someone was looking, truly looking, directly at me, even though his eyes couldn't see a thing. If you're already holding your breath, a quick subscribe keeps the darkness coming. Now stay with me, because what happens next changes everything. The chaos lasted 47 minutes. I know this because I counted. It's what I do when I'm afraid. I anchor myself to numbers, to the orderly logic of time passing. 47 minutes of gunfire and running boots and distant shouting in a dialect too old and thick for me to fully parse. 47 minutes during which Dante Calderone kept me inside a room I'd never seen before. A private study off the second landing, lined floor to ceiling with books and a single oil lamp that cast everything in amber. He let go of my throat the moment the door closed behind us. I told myself I didn't miss the warmth. He moved to the center of the room and stood still, head tilted, listening to something beneath the chaos that I couldn't hear. His fingers pressed against the wound at his side. A graze, I realized, not a deep cut. Painful, but not fatal. He didn't seem particularly concerned. I set the ledger box down on the desk because my arms were shaking and I needed to do something useful with them. The 1987 through 1992 financials, he said. Not a question. I looked at the box, then at him. You can smell old paper. I can smell the specific ink the Calderone accountants used before we switched suppliers in 1993. Cedar-based, distinctive. A pause. Why do you have them? Councilman Fredo asked me to pull them for the gathering. Something about the Vossari inheritance dispute. I stopped. There is no Vossari inheritance dispute, is there? The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. Who are you? He asked again. The same question from the staircase, but different now. Quieter. More careful. Serafina Luminara. I work in your archives. Have for 6 years. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. Like he was adjusting a calculation that had been slightly off. Luminara. Aldo Luminara's daughter. My father's name in his mouth felt like a blade. Yes. Your father died 3 years ago. He was killed, I said. There's a difference. Dante's head tilted. Most people use the passive construction. Died. Was taken from us. Was lost. He turned toward me, not quite to my face, 2 inches to my left, but close enough that I felt his attention like heat. You said killed. You know who did it. I had spent 3 years in these archives for exactly this reason. Cataloging, cross-referencing, building a picture from administrative records and financial ledgers and the kinds of paper trails that powerful men create carelessly because they believe no one in the basement is paying attention. I have a theory, I said carefully. Tell me. Not yet. Another silence. This one was different from the last. Not hostile, but watchful. the way a very intelligent man goes quiet when he's decided to be patient. "You know what's in those ledgers," he said. "I know what's in all the ledgers. That's my job. And you went to get them yourself when Fredo asked, even though you understood something was wrong with the request." He almost smiled. It didn't make him look kind. It made him look more dangerous, in a way that I found mortifying to admit was beautiful. Why? Because I needed to see what he was looking for. Because I had known for 8 months that someone inside the Calderon syndicate was systematically altering financial records, and the 1987 to 1992 files were the last layer of documentation I needed to prove who. Because my father hadn't died of a hit gone wrong, he had been silenced because he found the same evidence I had been quietly rebuilding from scratch. I didn't say any of that. Because it was my job, I said. He made that sound again, low, almost amused, almost something warmer. Outside the door, the sounds of the estate settling back into itself filtered through the walls. Orders being given, bodies being dealt with, the particular administrative calm that follows catastrophic violence in a household that has seen it before. Serafina. My full name in his voice was a different thing entirely from the clipped professional version I used for myself. It had weight, texture. "When this door opens, you will be escorted to a safe room and kept there until I send for you. I'm not a guest here. I'm staff." "You were staff." He turned away, his attention already moving somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't follow. "That changed 47 minutes ago when you put your hand on my arm and decided my life was worth saving." I hadn't thought of it as a decision. I'd thought of it as reflex. But standing in that amber-lit room, watching Dante Calderone navigate his world with terrifying competence, I began to understand that in this life, every reflex was a choice. And my choices had just caught the attention of the most dangerous man in Sicily. I told myself I was not afraid. I was lying. They kept me in the safe room for 11 hours. It was nicer than my apartment. That was the first thing I noticed and then immediately resented noticing. Cream walls, a real bed with linens that smelled like something expensive, a desk with actual good lighting. Someone had left a tray of food I didn't touch, and a pot of tea I absolutely did. I spent those 11 hours doing what I always do when I'm trapped somewhere. I worked. I had the ledger box. No one had thought to take it from me when they escorted me upstairs, which told me something about how the Calderon inner circle viewed archival materials. Background noise, administrative furniture, not a threat. That was their mistake. It had always been their mistake. I spread the ledgers across the desk in chronological order and spent the night doing what I'd been doing in pieces for 3 years, tracing the ghost. The ghost was a pattern of altered entries, small enough to seem like clerical errors individually, devastating in aggregate. Money redirected, contracts quietly modified, a slow, patient, invisible hand reshaping the Calderon financial structure from the inside over the course of 2 decades. By 4 a.m, I had what I needed. Not a name, not yet, but a shape. The ghost had a signature, a particular way of working that I now knew well enough to recognize. When the door opened at 7 and Nico Falco stepped inside, the enforcer I recognized from estate meetings I was never supposed to be paying attention to, I had already stacked the ledgers back in the box and was sitting quietly with my tea. "The Dawn will see you," Nico said. He looked at me the way most people in this world looked at me. The blank courtesy of someone acknowledging furniture. Then his eyes dropped to the ledger box and something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Almost. "Of course," I said, and followed him. Dante's private study in the East Wing was different from the amber room of last night. larger, sparer, with the particular austerity of a man who needs no visual comfort. The desk was real mahogany and very old. Every surface was organized with precise spatial logic. I understood immediately that this was a room where everything had a specific position, because the man who occupied it needed to find things without looking. He was standing at the window when I entered, his back to me, hands clasped behind him, blindfold in place. Outside, the hills of Palermo were burning gold in early morning light. "You worked through the night," he said. "The tea on the tray was very good. I can smell the cedar ink on your fingers. You went through the ledgers." I set the box on the chair beside the door. "Someone has been systematically stealing from you for approximately 22 years. The alterations are designed to look like administrative errors. They're not. The pattern is deliberate, sophisticated, and patient. Whoever did this planned it to be nearly impossible to detect without a comprehensive comparative analysis across all archive periods." Dante turned from the window. Even with the blindfold, the force of his attention was a physical thing, the way sunlight through a lens becomes fire. "How long have you known?" 8 months. I've been rebuilding the paper trail piece by piece. The 1987 to 1992 files were the last section I needed to confirm the pattern's origin point." I paused. "That's why Fredo wanted them last night. Someone needed to know how much I'd already found. They sent men for me to create the distraction." "Yes, I think so." The silence stretched. Outside, a bird called once and went quiet. "You have been sitting on evidence of systematic fraud inside my organization," Dante said very carefully, "for 8 months, without telling anyone. I needed to be certain, and I needed to know who I could tell safely." I met his blindfolded gaze without flinching. "Last night answered that question." He crossed the room. Not quickly. He never did anything quickly that he could do precisely instead. He stopped 2 feet from me and stood there, close enough that I could smell the faint cedar and iron that clung to him. "I want your complete analysis. Everything you have. And I want you here, in this estate, until this is resolved." "That's not an offer. That's a sentence." "It is both," he said, with the particular honesty of a man who has stopped pretending his requests are optional. "Your apartment in the Monreal district has a broken lock on the back window. You've been leaving it unlatched for months because the mechanism is stripped, and you haven't gotten around to fixing it. That window faces the alley where 3 of the 4 men from last night's attack were seen 2 days ago conducting surveillance." The blood left my face. "They know you work in the archives," Dante said. "They don't yet know what you found, but they will look for you, and your apartment is not safe. So I stay here. You stay here. You finish your analysis with access to every resource you need, and in exchange, I will find whoever killed your father and make certain they understand that debt." My father's name, my father's death. The thing I had carried alone for 3 years and never said out loud to anyone. I understood what he was doing, offering me the one thing I could not refuse, the one current that had been running under every day of quiet work in the archive basement, and I understood that refusing wasn't really an option. The broken window had already told me that, but I also understood, in some quiet bone-deep place, that I had already made this choice. I had made it on the staircase when I opened my mouth and guided a blind man away from an edge. "All right," I said. Dante extended his hand, palm up, between us. An old gesture, formal. I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around it, and I felt, again, that low frequency, the sense of something recognizing something. "Welcome to my world, Serafina Luminara," he said. Try not to be afraid of the dark. Comment below. If you were Sarah, would you have taken his hand? Or would you have run the moment you had the chance? The estate moved around me like a living thing I was still learning the rhythm of. I had a room on the 3rd floor, not a guest room, which would have suggested temporary, and not servant quarters, which would have suggested beneath notice. Something in between. A room with a proper desk and east-facing windows and bookshelves that someone had thoughtfully stocked with archival reference materials. Someone had paid attention. I tried not to think too hard about that. My archive access was expanded to include sections I had never been permitted to touch before. The financial operational records going back to 1969, the internal correspondence files, the personnel registry that the Calderon organization kept under a different classification system than anything a normal business would use. Nico brought me whatever I asked for and asked no questions. He had that quality, the good enforcer's quality, of being exactly as much as the moment required and nothing more. On the 3rd day, Dante came to my workroom. He knocked. I registered this as remarkable only later, that the Don of the Calderon Syndicate knocked on a door before entering a room in his own estate. At the time, I simply called out that it was open and kept my eyes on the ledger I was cross-referencing. Progress? He asked. The origin point is 2001, not 1987. The 1987 entries were a test run. Small, clean, never escalated. The real systematic alteration began in 2001 and ran in 3 distinct phases. Whoever did this took a 14-year break between the test and the implementation. That level of patience is extraordinary. He came to stand beside the desk, not looking over my shoulder. He couldn't, but near enough that I could feel the gravity of his attention. He had the gift of that, making you feel observed more acutely in his blindness than most sighted men managed with full vision. 2001, he repeated. That was the year my father died. I had known this. I had been careful about how to surface it. Yes. The succession period, Dante said, in the voice he used for things that had teeth, when everyone's attention was on the transfer of power. The perfect moment to start. The organization was in administrative flux. Financial oversight was the lowest priority, and whoever did this would have known that better than anyone. They were inside the transition. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was careful in a different way. My father trusted 3 people with full financial access during his final years. Myself, his private accountant, who died in 2009, and Marcello Draveno. The name sat between us in the light like something radioactive. Marcello, his underboss, his childhood friend, the man who had stood at Dante's right hand through the explosion 2 years ago that had stolen his sight. I haven't confirmed a name, I said, because it was true and because I understood what a confirmation would mean. But you have a direction. I have a direction, I admitted. Dante nodded once, slowly, and said nothing else about it. I filed that away. The capacity to absorb enormous information and give nothing back while he processed it. It was its own kind of power. That afternoon, Nico told me we were attending a meeting. Not we, as in me and Nico. We, as in me and Dante. The Calderon Syndicate had a quarterly sitting with their 3 allied families, the Serafinis from Catania, the Morano brothers from Naples, and the Tiberio family from Trapani. It was a formality as much as a business meeting, a ritual of presence and status that the Don was expected to attend regardless of what else was happening. I don't attend syndicate meetings, I said. You do now, Nico replied, in the tone that meant the conversation was finished. They dressed me for it. That was the word. Dressed me. Someone had acquired clothes that were not my pale wedding dress or the practical dark separates I wore for work. A deep wine-colored dress that fit in a way that suggested someone had taken my measurements while I slept, which was a thought I chose not to finish. Dante met me at the bottom of the main staircase. He looked the way he always looked, assembled with absolute precision, nothing out of place, the black silk blindfold somehow more elegant than an absence should be. He turned toward the sound of my footsteps and went very still. "The dress is wine," I said, because I had learned quickly that he preferred description to silence. "I know, I chose it." He extended his arm. "Tell me who's already in the room when we enter." So that was what I was there for. His eyes, his intelligence on the ground, his way of reading a room full of dangerous men who thought his blindness was a weakness. I took his arm, and we walked into that meeting together, and I described everything: who stood too close to the exits, who watched him instead of Nico, who had the particular micro-expression of a man performing loyalty, and Dante listened with his entire body and spoke once, and the room went quiet with the particular quality of quiet that only genuine fear produces. Salvatore Tiberio, the Don from Trapani, stared at me for the entire meeting with an expression that was not quite hostility and not quite hunger, something more calculating than either. On the drive home, Dante said, "Tiberio noticed you." "Yes." "Good." I turned to look at his profile against the car window. That was the point of bringing me. "One of them," he said, and in the fractional pause before he looked away, or the gesture that served looking away for him, I caught something in the angle of his head that had nothing to do with strategy. I didn't say anything, but I felt it the rest of the way home. That fractional pause, that something else. It was the piano that undid me. I had been living in the estate for 2 weeks when I found it, a concert grand in the music room at the end of the west corridor, black lacquer and absolute silence, kept in perfect tune despite the fact that no one ever seemed to play it. I went in on a Tuesday night when I couldn't sleep, and the numbers in the ledgers had started blurring together, and I sat on the bench and put my hands on the keys and played something quiet and half-remembered from my mother's house. I didn't hear him come in. "Don't stop," Dante said from somewhere near the door. I stopped anyway. My hands lifted from the keys. "I haven't played in years. I'm out of practice." I wasn't listening for precision. He moved into the room the way he moved through every space, calibrated, unhurried, the slight leading quality of attention that replaced the visual scan. He found the armchair near the window without touching anything and sat. "Play something else. Something you actually like, not something polite." I turned back to the piano. I played him something I had never played for anyone, something I used to play at 2 a.m. when my father was still alive, and the world still felt like it had a shape I understood, something that started quiet and built into something almost angry before it resolved back into stillness. When I finished, the room held the sound for a moment the way good rooms do. "Your father taught you," Dante said. "How did you?" "You play like someone who learned from someone they loved. There's a particular quality to it, a conversation in the music rather than a performance." He paused. "I haven't heard anyone play in this room since my mother died." I looked at him across the dark room. The lamp near the door caught the edge of his jaw, the careful stillness of his hands on the armrests. "Did she play?" I asked. "Every Sunday morning. I used to sit exactly where you're sitting now and listen to her play Scarlatti until the whole house smelled like coffee and Sunday and whatever she was making for dinner." Something moved across his face. Not grief exactly, but the clean scar tissue that long grief leaves. "I haven't thought about that in years." We stayed in the music room for a long time after that. I played and he listened, and we talked in the low voice people use in the dark, about his mother and my father, about music as a different kind of language, about the quality of silence in this house that was never quite empty because the walls had absorbed too much history. He told me about the explosion, not the details, not the who or why, though we both knew I already understood the direction of that, but the moment itself, the sound of it, the white-hot instant of pressure, and then the particular quality of the darkness that came after, which was different, he said, from any darkness he had known before. It took me 6 months to stop reaching for things that weren't there, he said. Light switches, faces, the specific angle of afternoon sunlight I used to read by. He was quiet. Now, I think about what I had differently. I was careless with it, the way you're careless with things you believe are permanent. I'm sorry, I said. Don't be sorry. Be honest with me instead. He turned his head toward me. You're afraid of something. Not of me. That passed in the first week. Something else. The ledgers. The shape taking form in the numbers. The name I wasn't ready to say out loud because saying it would make it real, and making it real would mean Dante would act on it, and action meant consequences I couldn't fully predict. I'm close, I said. To a confirmation. Give me 3 more days. 3 days, he agreed. He stood and crossed to the piano and stopped beside me. Close, very close, the warmth of him cutting through the cool night air. His hand found the piano's edge first, then moved by some internal geometry to my shoulder, his thumb resting at the curve of my neck. Sarah. Not Serafina. Not the formal syllables. Sarah. The shortened weight of it. Yes, I said, and my voice was not entirely steady. When this is over, he said, soft and certain as a closing door, I am going to ask you to stay. Not because you are useful to me, because this house has been quiet for a very long time, and you have made it sound like something again. His thumb traced a single slow line along the side of my neck. Not a demand, a declaration. Then he lifted his hand and walked to the door and left me sitting in the dark with my hands on the keys and my heart beating a frequency I had never felt before. I sat there for a long time. Then I turned back to the piano and played something I had no name for, something that started in a minor key and kept trying to resolve into major and never quite made it. It felt, I thought, like exactly where we were. On the morning of the 3rd day, I found the ghost. Not a direction, not a pattern, a name spelled out in the shadow language of altered ledger entries and rerouted funds, and a single administrative signature that appeared in 3 different places it should not have been. A signature that had been modified but not modified enough, carrying its maker's particular habit of closing the last letter with a backward curl that I had seen on 1,000 documents in 6 years of archival work. Marcello Draveno. I sat with the knowledge for 4 hours before I moved. This was not the instinctive paralysis of fear. It was something colder. Marcello had been Dante's closest ally for 30 years. He had stood beside Dante through his father's death, through the succession, through the explosion that blinded him. He had been the voice in Dante's ear when Dante could no longer see who was in a room. He had been trusted with the full knowledge of the Calderone organization's vulnerabilities in ways that would have made systematic theft not just possible, but simple. And he had arranged the attack 2 years ago. I was now certain of this too. The financial redirect that funded the explosive materials tracked back through 3 shell companies to a Draveno-adjacent account that had been dormant since 2003 and reactivated for 11 days in the specific window before the attack. He had blinded Dante, and then positioned himself as Dante's most trusted second. The specific cruelty of it made me go very still inside. I thought about my father, Aldo Luminara, who had spent his life as a low-level soldier and occasional administrative assistant, who had eyes for detail that his station didn't seem to warrant, who had come to me 18 months before his death excited about something in the archives that he was being careful not to say out loud, who had died 6 weeks later in what was documented as a hit gone wrong, a case of mistaken identity, nobody's fault. Marcello would have noticed my father the same way he had eventually noticed me, a nobody in the basement, too careful with the paperwork, too good at finding the things that weren't where they should be. I gathered my documentation, every piece, every cross-referenced entry, every shell company, every redirect. I built it into a single comprehensive package the way I had always done when a project reached completion, methodical, clear, with a written summary that left no interpretive room. Then I went to find Dante. He was in the courtyard. This was his late afternoon practice. He walked the perimeter of the estate's inner courtyard at the same time every day, his pace perfectly measured, using the sound of his own footsteps off the stone walls as a kind of sonar. I had watched him do it from the third-floor window more than once. It was the most peaceful I ever saw him. I waited until he completed the circuit and stopped near the fountain. "You found it," he said before I spoke. He could hear the change in my breathing, I realized. He had learned the sound of my distress the way he'd learned every other sound this estate produced. "Yes. Tell me." "Marcello," I said. The courtyard went very quiet. Even the fountain seemed to drop its sound. "Show me," Dante said. His voice was completely level. This was the thing about him. He absorbed devastation without theatrics, processed it somewhere deep and precise and private, and came out the other side with a plan already forming. We went to my workroom. I laid the documentation out and walked him through it verbally. Every entry, every redirect, every shell company, the signature curl that appeared in 3 impossible places. He listened with his hands flat on the table and his head slightly bowed, and did not speak until I finished. Then he said, "The explosion. Yes, I can trace the funding. It goes through a dormant account that Marcello controls through a subsidiary that was established in his mother's name in 1998. He blinded me," Dante said, in a voice that was perfectly ordinary, completely terrible. "And then spent 2 years watching you navigate the world without your sight, while he stole from you and waited for you to show enough weakness that he could justify a move on the organization." I paused. The attack at the masquerade was supposed to create that moment. Either you died or you were destabilized enough that the council would consider a leadership change. "But instead, I found you," Dante said. The weight of that, the strange alchemy of it, that the attack designed to destroy him had instead put him in the alcove where I was standing, had put his hand at my throat, had started whatever this was. "What happens now?" I asked. He straightened. "Now I have a conversation with Marcello." That sounds like a euphemism. It is. He turned toward me. "I need you to stay in this room tonight. Lock the door. Nico will be outside." "Dante, please." The word was careful, deliberate. I understood it had cost him something to say it. I have done most things in my life from necessity. I am asking this because I am asking, not commanding. I looked at him for a long moment, at the particular angle of a man holding himself together through will alone, the tight line of his jaw, the hands that were perfectly still in the way hands are still when they are preventing themselves from becoming fists. "Lock the door," I said. "I understand." He nodded. And then, because he was Dante Calderone, and he did nothing carelessly, he crossed to me and cupped my face in both hands and pressed his lips to my forehead. Brief, certain, the kind of touch that doesn't ask permission because it isn't a request. Then he left. I locked the door and sat at my desk and listened to the estate breathe around me and understood, with the particular clarity of very quiet rooms, that I was terrified not for myself, but for him. Comment below. Did you see Marcello's betrayal coming? And what do you think Dante's conversation with him is going to look like? I heard it at 11:15. Not gunfire. I had learned to identify that sound by now, the specific report of it, the way it bounced differently off the stone interior of the east wing versus the open courtyard. This was different. A kind of concussive silence that followed a conversation going very badly, then the sound of something heavy falling, then shouting in dialect that I could almost but not quite translate. Then nothing. I sat with the locked door for 40 minutes before Nico knocked. 3 times, the specific pattern he'd established the second day as a signal. I opened it. His face told me something had gone wrong, but not how wrong. "The Don needs you," Nico said. Not his usual economy of words. He said it like it cost him. Dante was in the study, standing, which I found relieving. There was blood on his shirt, not the wound from the masquerade, new blood. But he was standing and he was breathing, and when he turned toward the door, his attention found me with its usual precision. "Marcello got to a phone," Dante said, "before my men got to him." "Who did he call?" "Tiberio. Salvatore Tiberio, the Don from Trapani, who had watched me through the entire syndicate meeting with that calculating expression. I had described his micro-expressions to Dante on the drive home, and I had been right. He was performing loyalty. He had been Marcello's partner, the external piece of the play. "Tiberio is moving tonight," Dante said. "He'll have men at the estate within 2 hours. "How many?" "Enough that this becomes a problem." I thought about what I knew, the estate's layout. I had mapped it in my head in the first week out of the archivist's habit of knowing the architecture of wherever I was. The syndicate's documented relationships with the 3 other allied families. The communication protocols that went into the old files during the last contested succession in 1994. "The Serafini family," I said. Dante's head lifted slightly. "The Catania family. They were neutral during the 1994 dispute, but their loyalty records in the archive show they supported your father's line consistently going back to 1971. Their current Don is Benedetto Serafini, 72 years old, deeply traditional. He would have no tolerance for a coordinated attack on the Calderone seat." I crossed to the desk and found a piece of paper. "If you can get him on the phone in the next 20 minutes, before Tiberio has a chance to spin a narrative, you have a good chance of having the Serafinis activate the Mutual Defense Clause from the 1988 Alliance Agreement. I pulled that document last week. It's still in force." Dante stared at me, or stared toward me, his blindfolded face pointed with complete attention at the space where I stood. Then he said, "Nico, get Benedetto Serafini." What followed was 40 minutes of the most precise political maneuvering I had ever witnessed. Dante on the phone with an old Don, deploying the exact combination of respect and authority and factual specificity that the situation required. No threats, no drama. Simply the careful presentation of documented truth, the financial fraud, the explosion, the coordinated attack, delivered in a voice that communicated both the gravity and the certainty. Benedetto Serafini, I learned, had mistrusted Marcello Draveno for years, but had never been able to say why. He had the old Don's instinct for misalignment without the evidence to name it. I had given Dante the evidence. Dante gave it to Benedetto, and Benedetto said words that I watched rearrange Dante's posture. "We stand with you, Calderone, as we have always stood." The Serafini men arrived 40 minutes before Tiberio's. What should have been an overwhelming show of force became something entirely different. Tiberio's men arriving at a fortified estate backed by two allied families, with documentation of Tiberio's coordinated treachery already in the hands of the Syndicate Council. But nothing in this world goes clean. In the chaos of Tiberio's men hitting the perimeter and discovering they had walked into the wrong situation, someone made a decision I hadn't anticipated. Not Tiberio himself. One of his lieutenants, a man who had decided that if the play was failing, the only leverage left was me. He knew about the archivist who had brought down Marcello Draveno. He came through the east wing while Nico was at the front. I heard the door of the study open, and I turned, and the man standing there was not anyone I recognized, and the expression on his face was very clear in its intention. "The Don's little archivist," he said. "You're coming with me." I looked at the desk, at the letter opener, at the distance between us. I thought, I have spent 3 years being invisible, and they still found me. Then I thought, if they found me anyway, I might as well make it count. I moved before he finished his sentence. The letter opener was not a weapon. I want to be clear about this. It was a 19th century silver piece from the desk. Decorative, not particularly sharp, the kind of object that exists in old studies because it has always existed in old studies. What it was heavy, and I was angry in a way I had never been before. Not frightened angry, but something colder and more purposeful. The accumulated anger of 3 years in a basement and 6 years of being looked through and a father who was silenced for the crime of paying attention. I threw it. Hard. Not at the man. At the lamp behind him. The lamp shattered, and the room went dark, and the man lost his spatial reference. And I went left, low, moving toward the door with my shoulder down the way my father had once taught me to move through a space when you couldn't see clearly, keeping contact with the wall. I got through the door. I got into the corridor. What I ran into was Nico Falco, who had apparently heard the lamp shatter from the hallway and was already moving. The man behind me came through the doorway 2 seconds later, and lasted approximately 4 more seconds before Nico rendered the situation resolved. I stood against the corridor wall, breathing very carefully. Nico looked at me. "Are you hurt?" "No." He studied me for a moment with the particular expression of someone recalculating what they thought they knew about a person. "You smashed the lamp." "Yes." "Good thinking." "Thank you." He almost smiled. It was brief and real and entirely unexpected. The estate was secured by 2 a.m. Tiberio's men had retreated once the scale of what they'd walked into became clear. Tiberio himself had not come. He had sent his lieutenants, which told you everything about the kind of Don he was, the kind that moved pieces while staying safely out of reach. Dante found me in the corridor outside the study, sitting on the floor against the wall with my knees drawn up, because my legs had finally decided to register what my brain had been suppressing for the past 3 hours. He crouched down in front of me. He didn't say anything immediately. His hands found my face, both palms, the way he had before he left for the confrontation with Marcello. And he checked me the way he checked everything, with touch, with attention, with the particular focus of a man who has learned to read the world through contact rather than distance. "Your pulse is very fast," he said. "I'm aware." "You're cold." "Also aware." His hands moved from my face to my hands, wrapping around them, and the warmth of it was embarrassingly effective. I felt my breathing slow against my will. "Nico told me what you did," Dante said. "I threw a lamp. You made a decision under pressure with 0 hesitation. You used what you had. You got out." He paused. "That is not nothing, Sarah. That is not even close to nothing." I looked at him. Crouching on the floor of his own corridor, in blood-stained shirt and silk blindfold, holding my hands like they were something worth holding. the most dangerous man in Sicily looking at me, at the space where I was, with an expression that had nothing to do with strategy or usefulness or the particular transactional calculation that governed most of his interactions with the world. "What happens to Tiberio?" I asked. "The Syndicate Council convenes tomorrow. With the documentation you built and the Serafini family's testimony, there will be a formal judgment. Tiberio will answer for the coordinated attack, for the complicity in Marcello's actions, for the attempt to move against the seat. And Marcello?" A pause. "Marcello has already answered." I didn't ask for specifics. I understood the grammar of that sentence. "My father," I said. "Also?" Dante's jaw tightened. "Both." I thought I would cry. I had been waiting to cry about my father for 3 years, holding it somewhere below the work and the ledgers and the anger, and I thought this was the moment it would come. But what came instead was something quieter, a kind of settling, like a door that has been blown open in a storm finally being closed. "Thank you," I said. It felt inadequate. It was inadequate, but it was what I had. "Thank you," Dante said back, and he meant something entirely different by it. He meant the ledgers, the documentation, the 40 minutes on the phone with Benedetto Serafini that had changed the outcome of tonight. He meant the staircase and the 47 minutes in the amber room and every moment of careful attention I had paid to the world no one else thought I was qualified to observe. He meant, you saw things no one else saw, and that was the thing that turned the night. We stayed on the floor of the corridor for a long time after that, his hands around mine, the estate going quiet around us, the particular quality of silence that follows violence and means it is, for now, over. At some point, he said quietly, "I asked you to stay in the room." "I know." "You did not stay in the room." "No." I find that I cannot be angry about this. Good. I leaned my head back against the wall and looked at the ceiling and said, with the particular honesty that only extreme exhaustion produces, "Because I have spent 3 years being the woman who stays quietly in the room, and I think I am finished with that." The silence that followed was not empty. It was, I thought, the beginning of something else entirely. The Syndicate Council met for 7 hours. I was not in the room. This was not a slight. It was the structure of a world that would take longer than 7 hours to fully shift. But my documentation was in that room. Every ledger entry, every redirect, every shell company, the signature curl that appeared in 3 impossible places. My work was in there speaking in my absence, which felt unexpectedly like its own kind of presence. I sat in the archive room I had occupied for 3 years and waited. I had brought the remaining unprocessed files from the restricted section because I cannot do nothing, and the work was always there. Nico came at the 4th hour to tell me that the council had formally accepted the fraud documentation, and that Tiberio had been stripped of his seat, and his territory was in provisional receivership pending distribution. He came at the 6th hour to tell me that Dante was speaking now, and that the room was listening. He came at the 7th hour to tell me it was done. I put down the ledger I was holding and sat very still for a moment. 3 years of work. My father's death. The 8 months of careful rebuilding from nothing. The quiet hours in the basement while men above me conducted the business of an empire, never once looking down to where the real documentation of everything they were doing was being kept. It was done. Dante found me there. Of course he did. He had learned the geography of this house to a precision that made direction irrelevant, and I had become, in the weeks I had been here, a fixture he could locate by sound and habit, and whatever else guided him through a world without light. He came in and sat across the desk from me, and for a moment we just occupied the same room in the same quiet. "Benedetto Serafini has asked who my archivist is," Dante said. He wants to know the name of the woman who built the case that held. What did you tell him? The truth, that you are Aldo Luminara's daughter, that you have spent 6 years in the Calderone archive making yourself invisible in order to see everything, and that you are the reason the Calderone organization is still standing tonight. He paused. He said your father would be proud. My father would be proud. 3 years of holding that grief carefully, like something that would shatter if I moved too fast, and those 5 words cracked it open simply and completely. I let it. I had earned that. Dante waited. He was very good at waiting. When I had my breathing back, he said, I made you a promise on the morning you took my hand. I said I would find whoever killed your father and make certain they understood that debt. He laid both hands flat on the desk between us. Marcello understood. The record reflects it. And Tiberio, who knew and did nothing because it served him, will spend the rest of his life understanding the consequences of looking the other way. You kept your promise, I said. I keep my promises, he said simply. Not as a boast, as a statement of architecture, who he was. I looked at him across the desk. At the blindfold he had worn every day I had known him, at the precise way he carried himself, at the hands that could end things and had now, through the medium of my work and his judgment, ended the right ones. You told me something, I said, in the music room, after the piano. I remember. You said when this was over, you were going to ask me to stay. Yes. This is over. Yes. He was very still. Are you going to make me ask, Serafina? I stood up and walked around the desk. I stopped in front of him, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, the particular gravity of someone who takes up more space in a room than their body accounts for. I reached out and did what no one else in this estate, in this organization, in his life, had apparently been permitted to do. I removed the black silk blindfold, slowly, carefully, with both hands. His eyes were dark gray, not the black that the mythology suggested, gray like storm water, like old marble, like the particular shade of dusk over the Sicilian hills, just before the light goes completely. They did not focus on me. They moved toward light as eyes do, an automatic reflex, and they were very beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with their function. He let me look at them. He did not flinch. They don't hurt? I asked. In the light? Not anymore. I have some light perception, brightness and shadow, not shapes. A pause. What do you see? Gray, I said, like the sea before a storm. I folded the silk in my hands. I'm staying? Yes, he said. Not surprise, not relief. Something more settled than either. The sound a house makes when it finally has the right number of people in it. He reached up and found my hands, the folded silk between them, and held on. There are things that happen after, in a story like this one. The ongoing business of a restructured organization, the months of rebuilding trust, the slow public acknowledgement of a woman who had spent her life being invisible, now occupying a visible position beside the dawn of the Calderone Syndicate. The work of grief and justice that doesn't resolve in a single night, no matter how decisive the night is. There is Benedetto Serafini becoming something like an uncle. There is Nico Falco almost smiling more than twice. There is the archive room evolving from a place I worked alone to a place where a very large, formally dressed blind man occasionally brings me tea and sits across the desk and listens while I explain what the numbers are saying. There is the music room, on Sunday mornings, always. There is Dante's voice saying Sarah in the particular way it says Sarah, with the weight of someone who has never said anything carelessly in his life. There is the moment, 3 months later, when he takes my face in his hands in the courtyard where he walks every afternoon, and I describe the color of the bougainvillea and the quality of the light and the way the hills look at that exact hour, and he says quietly, completely, I see everything I need. There is that. Because this is what I want you to understand, my beautiful sinners. The woman no one looked at and the man who could not see built the truest kind of visibility between them, the kind that isn't about being observed, the kind that is about being known. Dante Calderone found his light not because he could see her, but because, for the first time in a very long time, she decided to be seen. And that is the story of Dante and Sarah, the blind Mafia king who ruled in darkness, the archivist who had been invisible for so long she had forgotten she had edges, the moment on a marble staircase when two people found each other in the middle of chaos and changed the whole shape of the night. If this story found something in you, if you felt the weight of that music room scene, or the moment she removed his blindfold, or the 7 hours of waiting with a ledger box while her work stood up in a room she wasn't allowed to enter, then this channel is your home. Drop in the comments. What was the moment this story got you? The staircase? The piano? The letter opener? I want to know. Subscribe if you haven't. Hit the notification bell because the next story is already building and it is going to be something else entirely. Until then, stay in the dark with me. It's warmer than it looks. Goodbye for now, my beautiful sinners. The eclipse in his light, then his.